The air in the velvet curtain was a suffocating blend of stale cigarette smoke, cheap perfume, and the lingering scent of spilled gin. It clung to Marlowe like a second skin, a familiar and unwelcome embrace. The speakeasy, a hidden heart beating beneath the city's glamorous façade, pulsed with a low, rhythmic thrum of jazz. A muted trumpet wept a bluesy tune, its notes weaving through the low hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the occasional sharp laugh. Marlowe, a man carved from shadows and cynicism, stood near the bar, his trench coat a dark silhouette against the dim, amber light. His fedora, pulled low over his eyes, concealed the assessing gaze that swept across the room. Each face, each gesture, each hushed word was a potential clue, a thread in the tangled skein of the city's underbelly. He wasn't here for the pleasure of the forbidden, he was here because the city's secrets, like stubborn stains, had a habit of finding their way to him. He'd gotten the call an hour ago, a cryptic message from a nameless contact. The canary has gone silent. Velvet curtain. Midnight. The canary. That was their nickname for Frankie Fingers Flanagan, a small-time informant who'd been feeding Marlowe crumbs of information on the city's power players. Frankie was nothing special, a weasel with loose lips and a nose for trouble, but he was Marlowe's weasel. And now, he was silent. Marlowe took a slow sip of his whiskey, the burn a familiar comfort. The barman, greasy-haired fellow with eyes that darted like startled birds, slid him a knowing glance. He knew Marlowe's type, the kind of man who asked too many questions and didn't accept easy answers. But he also knew better than to get involved. He was just a cog in the machine of this clandestine world. The music swelled, reaching a crescendo before abruptly dropping back into its melancholic rhythm. And then, Marlowe saw him. A figure lurking in the darkest corner of the room, a shadowy presence that seemed to absorb the already scarce light. The man was partially obscured by a large potted plant, but even in the gloom, Marlowe recognized the distinctive tilt of his head, the way his shoulders hunched forward. Salvatore, Sal, Moretti. Sal was a ghost from Marlowe's past. A phantom he'd thought he'd successfully banished. A mid-level enforcer for the notorious Silk, Rossi. Sal had a reputation for violence and a disconcerting obsession with collecting rare, exotic birds. He was a man of few words and even fewer scruples. Marlowe had put him away almost 2 years ago for assault, but the city's justice system, as always, proved to be more leaky than a sieve, and Sal was back. A flicker of something, anger, perhaps, or maybe just a deep-seated wariness, stirred within Marlowe. Sal's presence here, tonight, felt like more than just coincidence. He pushed away from the bar, his movements fluid and deliberate despite his age. He traversed the crowded room, his eyes fixed on Sal, ignoring the curious glances that followed his progress. The murmurs of the crowd seemed to fade into a distant hum as he drew closer. Sal was sitting at a small table, nursing a drink that looked like a deep, ruby red. He was alone, his gaze fixed on some distant point, his expression unreadable. When Marlowe finally reached his table, he didn't look surprised. It was as if he'd been expecting him. "Moretti," Marlowe said, his voice low and gravelly, the unspoken threat hanging in the air. His tone was a carefully constructed barrier, a warning to tread carefully. Sal's eyes finally flicked up, his gaze cool and unnervingly calm. "Marlowe." It was a single word, flat and devoid of emotion, but Marlowe could feel the tension radiating from him. "What are you doing here?" Marlowe asked, his Question sharp as a shard of glass. And don't tell me you're here for the music? Sal took a slow sip of his drink, his gaze never wavering. Just enjoying the ambience. You know, the atmosphere. He paused, a faint smirk playing on his lips. A man can't relax. Relaxing by yourself in a place like this? Marlowe scoffed. He pulled up in empty chair opposite Sal, ignoring the unspoken invitation. You're a man who prefers the company of the birds, not the humankind. And quot. Sal's eyes narrowed slightly. You always did have a way of cutting to the quick, Marlowe. And you always had a way of finding yourself in trouble, Marlowe retorted. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Frankie Flanagan. Have you seen him? The name seemed to unsettle Sal, if only for a heartbeat. He blinked, and his gaze finally shifted away, focusing on the swirling liquid in his glass. Frankie. Can't say that I have. His voice was smooth, but Marlowe's senses were sharper. Now, he detected a flicker of something in Sal's eyes, a flicker of guilt, of fear, or maybe both. Don't lie to me, Sal. It doesn't suit you, Marlowe said, his voice like sandpaper across stone. He was here tonight. Sal finally looked up, his eyes dark and dangerous. And what makes you say that? Because Frankie was my canary, Marlowe replied, the underlying threat clear. And when a canary stops singing, someone has to find out. Why? Sal let out a soft laugh, a chilling sound that sent a shiver down Marlowe's spine. You always were a sentimental fool, Marlowe. Perhaps he decided to move on, find a new cage. Marlowe knew better. Frankie wouldn't disappear without a trace. He was a creature of habit, a cockroach that clung to the shadows. Something had happened, and Marlowe was determined to find out what. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I don't believe you, Moretti. And I'm going to find Frankie. And when I do, I'm going to find out who silenced him. And if I find out you had anything to do with it. He let the threat hang in the air. Unspoken but understood. He didn't wait for a reply. He pushed through the crowd, his gaze scanning the room, his mind already racing through possible scenarios. The jazz band played on, its melancholic tune now a soundtrack to the growing unease in the room. The air was still thick with smoke and secrets, but now, there was a new element, a palpable tension that had settled in the heart of the night. And Marlowe, the hunter in the night, knew his work was just beginning. He knew this case was far from over, it was just getting started. He had to find Frankie and then he had to find out. The speakeasy, once a refuge of secrets, now held the promise of a dangerous truth, truth Marlowe was determined to unearth.